All right. Hey, everyone. Let's see. Are we live yet? It seems like we're live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. You tuned into another SAP community call. And today's topic is learn how to use Python in the SAP ecosystem. My name is Menina Chow. I am part of the SAP community team, and I'm very, very thrilled and excited to have Christian Drumm with me, Christian Drumm, who has built over a couple of years already his reputation in the SAP community. I think 2016 he had been member of the month, and now since quite some time he is SAP Champion, so quite known in the SAP community atmosphere. But he is also of course, not only an SAP Champion, but professor for information systems at the University of Applied Sciences in Aachen, consultant, co-founder of the ABAP Code Retreat. And yeah, we're really, really excited to have you here to give us insights into Python and how to learn that, how to use it. For the audience that's watching right now, feel free to ask questions anytime. We will monitor the chat, and unlikely other community calls, we will really try to answer them during the call. So feel free to pop them into the chat whenever you feel like it fits into what you hear from Christian, and we'll see if we can get them answered. With that, I wish us a lot of fun. Enjoy this community call. And Christian, I would say the screen is yours.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the nice introduction. Let me share my screen, or at least my browser. So that should now be visible. So you should see my personal webpage. So most of the things that Menina already mentioned are written here. I provide this page just if you try to get in contact with me. That's probably your best bet. You can always look me up on the web. You will quickly find me somewhere. But so my personal webpage, there are links to my different profiles. There's my email address. If you like to get in contact with me via social media or email or whatever, that's a good starting point. And it also contains some information to what we are going to do today. So what I will show you today, I have collected also in a blog post, which is called Using SAP AI Services in Python. And this is the basis of today's community call. So if you want to read what I show you right now in the next 30 minutes or so, with a little bit more detail, you can have a look at this blog post, and it's also available on the SAP community website. So let's start. What is actually the background of all of this? What you see right now is in Python a Jupyter notebook, which is an environment that can be used to write text, write documentation, as you see on the screen, and also to execute Python code. And it's the tool I usually use when I teach Python programming to students, and that was the basis of this call in the end, I also used it during a large MOOC on the OpenSAP platform, where a colleague and I taught an introductory Python course. And one of the questions we got all the time during this course was, why is SAP teaching Python? Is Python going to be the next language? Is ABAP now obsolete? And questions like this. Obviously, this is not the case, but why is SAP teaching Python? Because it's just one of the languages you can use in the SAP ecosystem. Here on the blog post, I have, for example, a link to the SAP tutorials website on developers.sap.com. If you search there for Python, you get 1 mission, 6 groups, and 19 tutorials already. And it's basically across the board, from querying a HANA database here to, I just scroll down and try to find something, set up tools to connect with and operate the SAP AI core. So it's across the board of the different SAP solutions. There are possibilities to use Python as a way to interact with the SAP software. And especially if we look at like the more modern solutions, everything that's, for example, available in the cloud and has the API that's available on the API Business Hub, all these tools, all this software you can easily connect to using Python. So different possibilities, lots of possibilities. I decided to use one particular service, namely the SAP AI Business Service, to show you what's possible with Python. There is no particular reason why I selected this service. It was just the first one that that came to my mind, which I wanted to try out for quite a while. So I selected the SAP AI Business Service. When you look at the AI Business Services on the documentation, and I think I have a link here as well, it becomes obvious that the SAP AI Business Service is actually a collection of different services. So, for example, there is the entity recognition service that can be used to detect entities in unstructured text, or there is something that's called document classification, which can be used to classify business documents into user-defined categories. So the AI Business Services consist of a set of, I think, 6 different services. And today we will be using the Business Entity Recognition Service. As mentioned before, the Business Entity Recognition Service is a service that can be used to detect and highlight entities in unstructured text. And it's based on machine learning, but that's not what we are going to use today. We are just using the service out of the box. What does entity recognition mean? So I have an example here. If you think of the following text, Christian Drumm works at the FH Aachen. The FH Aachen is located at the Eupener Straße 70 in Aachen, Germany. That's a unstructured text. The entity recognition service would be able to identify some of the concepts in this text. For example, it would or could identify that there is something like an address, which is the Eupener Straße 70 in Aachen, Germany, that the text talks about a person, Christian Drumm, and it also talks about some kind of organization like FH Aachen. So that's an interesting service to get structured information from unstructured text, and we're going to try to use this service in Python. And how do we do this? So the approach is basically the same, in quotes, for all these services that are available on the SAP API Business Hub. Whenever there is a service available on the SAP API Business Hub, we can go there and find information how to access the service. So I'll open up the API Business Hub right now, and we can search here for the entity recognition service, and I find the Business Entity Recognition Service. And when I click on the service, I get more details. There's the API reference, which gives me all the different API calls that are available for a certain service. There is information how to use the service using the Cloud SDK with Java or JavaScript. Python is unfortunately missing here, so still possibilities to improve the website. No, just kidding. It's not a language SAP is pushing on the API Business Service. But anyways, there's also the possibility to try out the service. Right. I could now go and use this website to try to invoke different operations of the business entity recognition service. We're not going to do it using the website in this call, but instead we are using the information from the API Business Hub to first call the service using some command line tool, and then secondly to really invoke the service using Python. Which command line tool am I going to use? I'm going to use HTTPy, which is the command line tool that can do basically the same thing as, for example, Postman, or the in Visual Studio Code, there is also some tool you can use to call services. So I'm using HTTPy. You could use the website on the API Business Hub. Yeah, choose whatever tool works for you. And what we need to do in order to access the business entity recognition service is 3 steps. First, we need to get an OAuth token. Then we need to post the inference data we wanted to get the entity recognized in, and the third step is to get the result. So let's do the first step. I'm not discussing in this call the details of OAuth. If you're interested in the protocol, there is a documentation linked in the blog post, which you can have a look at. Basically, OAuth is a technology, a protocol to securely access services in the internet. What we need to do to access the entity recognition service is to call a certain endpoint, this one, OAuth/token, and request a new BIRA token. In order to do this, we need to supply a client ID and a client secret. So the client ID and the client secret, that's individual information of your instance of the business entity recognition service. If you activate the service inside the business technology platform, you can get the individual client ID and client secret of your installation. I'm not showing you mine because that would allow everyone that's watching this video later on to access my account, my installation. What I did is I wrote a small script that contains my client ID and client secret and publish them as environment data, as environment variables. So therefore, before we can continue, I have to execute the script or source it. So now I have the sequence in place that will enable me to call the service. How do I call the service? As said before, I use HTTPy. We copy that over. What you see here is basically a HTTP request. I provide the authentication data, my client ID and my client secret, which are stored in an environment variable. And then I invoke my specific instance, which has this name, and I call the OAuth token endpoint. And when I do this and everything works, I get as a result an access token. So this access token I can now use to perform the next steps. Let's store this access token for a second, again in an environment variable. Let's call it my token. And I just save the token here. And I did something wrong. What did I wrong? Oh, of course, I don't need to provide the dollar sign. So now that should work. I have an access token now stored in the variable my t. So that's the first step. Request an OAuth token for the service. Let's try to execute the inference. Executing the inference is really simple. We need to provide the token, use the authentication method bearer token. Then we call this API endpoint. We create, so it's a post request, which creates an inference job. And we just provide some kind of text and the model that should be used for this inference. So let's execute this. I did something wrong, sorry for that. Let's copy this over. So. When I execute this, I get HTTP 202 accepted. This is good. Everything that starts with 2 is usually correct, or what you like to have if you do some HTTP interaction. And I get back the ID of an inference job. This inference job has now been submitted, is scheduled in the background, and at a certain point in time is finished. Usually, if we go back and execute now the next invocation using the HTTP tool, it would already be finished. So let's try this. To get the results, we have to use this request, which is now an HTTP GET. And we need to add the job ID to the end, which would give us the results of the service. Again, I provide the authentication token as a parameter. And we see, great, the service worked, we get a success. And here we get the entities that have been identified by the entity recognition service. So there is a city, which is called Aachen. There is a country, Germany. There seems to be a customer with my name, Christian Drumm. There is a house number, number 17, and so on. Yeah, we also see here that it's not 100% correct. At Eupener Straße is labeled as a street. Actually, the street is called Eupener Straße, so the at doesn't belong to the street address. And we also get, with each and every of the values, some confidence telling us how confident the model is that this inference is correct. So we also see here, for example, we just have a confidence of 88%. Yeah. I guess it's values between 0 and 1 that Eupener Straße is indeed a street. So this is how to use the entity recognition service using 3 individual small HTTP requests. But what we wanted to do today is not to use HTTP to interact with SAP services, but instead use Python. So after I now showed you how to access the service, you have some first understanding how to access the service. Let's do this with Python. And this is basically the Python code that's required to do the same in a Python program. it's actually more complex than necessary. I built in a few features that would not be necessary to just do a bare simple invocation. So let me walk you through this little Python program to give you an understanding of what I'm doing here. So I want to keep my client ID and my client secret. So therefore, I stored them in an environment variable, and at this 2 lines just reading these values from the environment. I could simply have stored them in a string as well. But yeah, just to be a little bit on the safe side with my service, I stored them not visible. We need to use 2 services. So there is the authentication service, which is located here, and the BERA, the business entity recognition service, which has this URL. So I store these as a string constant again, to being able to reuse them later on. So the next thing is to ask the user for some text that should be sent to the entity recognition service. And then I simply execute the 3 steps we did beforehand using HTTP. First, we need to get an authentication token from the authentication service, providing the client ID and the client secret. Here I'm using the requests library, which is one of the standard Python libraries to perform HTTP requests. It's really easy to use. I just import the request library, and later on I can execute GET or POST requests by simply providing a service URL, a payload, and header or authentication information. The result of this invocation will be hopefully HTTP 200 return code and an authentication token. If the invocation of the authentication service worked, I'm creating here the payload. So the payload of the service needs to be in a certain format. This is specified in the API Business Hub as well. So basically, I provide the text, the user input, and I have to specify which model to use, which in this case is always the SAP Address Entity Service. And we also need to construct some header information. It's just the access token that was returned from the previous call. And then I can just submit the inference job, what we did beforehand with an HTTP request manually. And then that's one of the steps that looks a little bit complicated. I have to wait for this inference job to finish. So I always do a request to the inference service and check if its status is already success. And once we have the status success, we know the job is finished, and we can then read the resulting information from the job result. So that's what's happening here. So it's actually pretty simple Python code, like 20 lines of code, which are necessary to connect to the authentication service, get an access token, connect to the entity recognition service, post some information, and get the result back. Yeah, and let's try to do this. Just execute this Python cell. Now I have to come up with some creative request for the service. Let's just use Christian does not work at SAP SE in Waldorf in Germany. I haven't tried this before. Let's see what the entity recognition service makes from this text. We don't get an error message. That's good. The service seems to be running and the invocation working. We get these little dots down here every 2 seconds. And after like 10 seconds or so, the job is finished. And here is the result. And it's pretty good, I would say. So there is the identification of the city Waldorf and the identification of the country Germany. SAP SE is not a customer name, so the model doesn't recognize it. Yeah, and the other information couldn't be matched as well. So it seems to work. So now we have this little program in place. Yeah, we can just go and use the entity recognition service. Let's try something else. Christian Drumm works at the FH Aachen. He is located at the Eupener Straße 70 in. That's not the correct zip code, but I can't remember the correct one. Aachen and Germany. Okay. Again, yeah, let's just run this little program and we get hopefully some result. A similar result than before. Christian Drumm as a customer name. This time the street address or the street name was identified correctly. The house number, the zip code. Z is not a village, but Aachen is a village, and we also get the country. So yeah, that's how to access any service that's available on the API Business Hub using Python. And this, of course, enables you to do all kinds of nice little experiments, right? Just invoke some kind of service, get some data back, send it somewhere else. These are the kind of programs which I think Python is really useful to do some initial experiments, glue stuff together, see if something works the way you expect it. And yeah, if you understand how things work together, you can go and develop it in any other language if you like, or just continue down the Python route. No. One more thing I wanted to mention. I'm not sure if everyone is listening already knows Python. There is still the open SAP course available that was run last year with Stefan Jacobs and myself, Python Introduction. So if you try to get a little bit better understanding of Python or an introduction in the first place, I can really recommend the course. A lot of learners have been happy with it, and I think we created something really nice there. And from then, you can basically, with what you get from the course, you can do everything I've shown you here easily yourself, and you're ready to use Python in the SAP context. Yeah, that's what I wanted to show you, and I'm happy to answer any questions or go into detail in a certain area if you're interested in more information there.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, from the audience, it would be, of course, very interesting for us to know how much are you familiar with Python, and of course, do you have burning questions for Christian right now? If you are familiar with Python, yeah, maybe just give us a little thumbs up and chat with us. Let us know how much you liked this call, or if you would like to go into certain areas as Christian offered to dive into. Otherwise, I think you've heard some great resources also that Christian mentioned, going from the developers.sap.com site, where tutorials are available, to the coming Open SAP course. So lots where you can learn and explore yourself. And as Christian has shared his contact details and is, of course, also in the community, we're always around if you need us. If you have any questions, if you want to follow up, if you want to connect with Christian, you're very welcome to do so. But with that, I would say we'll count down to 3 to 0, from 3 to 0. And if we don't see any questions, then I would say we can close this call early. Wish you a great rest of the day and hope to see you all in one of the upcoming community calls again, or maybe in one of the upcoming community events. For that, go to community.sap.com. We have lots of new location-based groups where you can find events in different locations. Maybe there's one around your corner. It's time to meet up and connect and learn together. So with that, I, in my mind, counted down from 3 to 0. And Christian, again, thank you so much for being here, for taking the time with us and the community. On behalf of the community, big thanks. And also to the audience watching. With that, goodbye and see you soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks for watching.
Okay, stream is